Hello and welcome to the Comedian's Paradise. This is a podcast where we speak to mavericks across the stand-up, comedy, and clown world. Now, today's guest has a very beautiful sounding voice. He could sing a song or a poem to you that would turn you would seduce anything. He is a man that he's a man that's gone from the performance world into the world of sitcom writing. He's won many awards as a sitcom writer. He is a man who you've probably heard of this program. It is The Reluctant Persuaders and Hull Raisers. He's a man who can turn Flight of the Conchords into a diamond. Please welcome a man with a beautiful sounding name, Ed Rowett. Ed Rowett, sorry.
That's okay. It's an easy mistake to make. That is an amazing introduction. Thank you. I don't know if I can live up to it, but I'll do my best.
And you mentioned before that there's a man that's committing a crime of saying your surname wrong, that manages a football team.
Yeah, there's the manager of Oxford United, is where I live in Oxford, is a guy called Gary Rowett. So he has the same surname, but he pronounces it the opposite way. So he's spreading disinformation. Because weirdly, everyone who sees my name goes for Rowett. 90% of people assume it's Rowett, but in fact, it's Rowett.
Yes.
So if I contribute nothing else to this podcast, let me put the record straight on that.
Now, to anyone so everyone, do not commit the crime of saying Rowett. It's Rowett, okay? But most importantly, let's find out about your story, Ed. Tell us a bit about how you became a sitcom writer and what made you fall in love with sitcom writing.
Well, it's interesting and difficult to think, where did it actually start? When I was growing up, I absolutely loved things like Blackadder, Fawlty Towers. I had VHSs of those that I used to just watch endlessly on repeat. I guess the first kind of art, the first TV that I loved was comedy. And not just sitcoms, I watched Not the 9 o'clock News endlessly. And what I wanted, I thought, was to be an actor. And even though I was writing comedy, I think from a young age, I remember at school, me and a group of friends writing a comedy show that was essentially the League of Gentlemen. We all liked the League of Gentlemen, so we were like, how can we rip this off? And it was a sort of League of Gentlemen set in a school. So, rather than Royston Vasey, it was like the school and all the different teachers. Basically exactly the kind of show that aspiring comedians write when they're at school, because who are the kind of comedy characters around them? It's the teachers. But yeah, I mean, we wrote that. It never went anywhere. We never performed it. But it was the idea was that we were writing something for ourselves to perform. So writing was always, I think, a means to an end for me. Right through school and then going to university, I was writing, but it was because I wanted to perform. It was never with an idea that I would write something to give to someone else. And a lot of the time I was performing plays. I did less writing at university because there were so many opportunities to perform in plays that I was like, well, I don't need to write because I can do the performing. The opportunities are just there, ready-made. And it was only when I was getting to the end of university and sort of thinking about going out into the world that you realize this sort of magical 3 years where you get to be in all these great plays all the time, that's going to go away when I leave university and I'm out in the world and I have to get a proper job and that kind of stuff. So towards the end of university, I sort of more seriously started thinking, okay, I've got to write stuff. If I want to perform, I've got to write the stuff myself. I've got to create the opportunities for myself. So I started writing sketches with a friend of mine at university, because we were like, well, that's a really easy way to get ourselves out there. We'll be a double act. You're looking at the photos of the previous Footlights and you're looking at Mitchell and Webb and that kind of thing and thinking, okay, well, we can just be two people and we can put a ampersand between our names and we can, have an act that will showcase ourselves as actors, not really thinking that we were going to be showcasing ourselves as writers. But I guess the period after university where I was doing that live sketch show, and I was doing shows in places in London that you probably know, places like the Canal Cafe, the Etc. Theatre, Hen and Chickens, that sort of thing. And then going up to Edinburgh every summer was all with a view to this is a comedy act. This is we're hoping people will notice us as actors or as a kind of unit that could be a show, could be a radio sketch show or could be a TV sketch show. And yet over time, I just started to realize actually it's the writing that I feel more comfortable with. And also it's the writing that people are responding to. I was not a terrible actor, but it's not enough to not be a terrible actor. If you want to make it as an actor, you've got to be a great one. And I certainly wasn't a great actor. So I increasingly felt I'm more comfortable with the writing, and, the writing is what people are responding to. And so sort of gradually the performance element fell away, and I started moving from writing sketches, which I love, and writing a sketch is a wonderful thing, but it's quite limiting. There's only so much you can do in a 3 or a 4 minute sketch. And you start to think, well, what could I do with a character over half an hour? What could I do with them over 6 episodes? Where could I go? What sort of depths could I explore? And so, I guess I wrote my first sitcom. I had my first sitcom idea sort of 2014. Entered it into a thing called the BAFTA Rockcliffe New Writing Forum, which is a new writing competition that has a strand for sitcoms and a strand for children's TV, I think, and one for screenplays. And I sort of made it to the final shortlist of that. And that was sort of then the beginning of the sort of the journey proper, as it were. Everything else was a kind of lead up to that kind of proper starting point.
Now, you said something that was very interesting, and this is going to sound long-winded, but I remember last year I was sat in the car and I did a theatre school in Italy, Mass Theatre, and I was sat with the teacher, Matteo Destro, and he's a remarkable man. He's built a whole theatre school 3 months of the year in Italy, Tuscany, small little town, San Miniato, gets artists across the world, and he makes his entire living off of that. But I was asking him some advice and talking about different things. And when he switched to being more of like a teacher and being a director rather than being an actor, I asked him, what's your advice on finding your thing? And he said, being honest with yourself, which is the hardest thing. And I find sometimes when I see stand-ups in America or in the UK, a lot of them they follow a lot of what they've seen on TV or other comedians, and they're very scared of being different and using their eccentricities or what makes them unique to being funny. So they follow what they see. They're too scared of being different. And maybe I'm going through this as well, but I found I wanted to be a comic that says this or that. But to be honest, the thing that I do that makes people laugh is I think I'm a lot smarter than what I am, but I do dumb things on stage that gets people laughing. And that seems to be what works, if I'm being honest. What was the thing you said? Because you wanted to be an actor, but you realized that you were better and you found more passion for the writing. What made you realize that and be honest with yourself rather than sticking with acting, going through it? What made you decide to switch to sitcom writing?
I was in a play in London after I'd left university, which was a brilliant play and a brilliant part. We were performing it in an art gallery just off Charing Cross Road. It was a fantastic opportunity, and we did it for a couple of months. So it was a proper run. And I guess I remember maybe halfway through it thinking, I'm really enjoying this. And I had to take a bit of a step back and think, this is sort of as good as it gets. Okay, it's not the West End or, it's not a huge successful thing. It is still a fringe theatre show, but it's a great play and it's a great part. And I'm not really enjoying it. And I suddenly felt like the life of an actor is not going to be this most of the time. You know, you've got to find enjoyment and job satisfaction in all kinds of things, in like doing an advert or doing a corporate job, things that are going to be less artistically fulfilling than the thing I'm doing. And even the thing I'm doing is not giving me what I want. And what is doing that is comedy writing. So I think that was the moment where I sort of had a real wake-up call, because up until then I'd been like, no, I am an actor. That is the thing that I want to be. So that was, I guess that was the moment where I feel like a proper switch occurred. And it's interesting what you say about, you know, being honest with yourself, and being honest about what you're good at, and being afraid to be different. When I started writing my radio sitcom, so my sitcom was for Radio 4, and there are lots and lots of sitcoms on BBC Radio 4. And I feel like that's something people don't necessarily realize. People sort of think radio sitcom and they think the 1950s. But actually, Radio 4 is making a huge amount of comedy, you know, stand-up sitcoms, all kinds of stuff. And they're giving opportunities to younger, newer writers, or not even necessarily younger, but first-time writers. But so when I got my opportunity on Radio 4, I hadn't written a sitcom before. And I was obsessed with the idea that I had to write a sitcom that was like the other sitcoms on Radio 4. Because the challenge of it was almost overwhelming to me. I mean, I was in my sort of early to mid-20s. And the thing that I was writing was going to be on the radio. So I was like, I've got to listen to every single Radio 4 sitcom and understand how they work and what they're like, because mine has to fit in with all those other sitcoms. And I think I only realized it was a gradual process over writing the show. But it was definitely after the first series that I started to think, actually, what's the point in writing a sitcom that's exactly the same as all the other sitcoms on Radio 4? You know, well, why would I want to do that? And why would anyone want to listen to it? The thing I should be writing is the thing that only I can write. And that does things that nobody else is doing. And I feel, as the show went on, so we did 4 series of it in the end, and I think the 3rd and 4th series are my thing and my voice, but I would never go back and listen. I mean, not that I spend huge amounts of time going back listening to my own work anyway, but I definitely wouldn't listen to the first series, because it makes me wince a bit, because I think, that's me trying to fit in, like you said, and not having the confidence to do my own thing. So that was definitely a learning curve, but probably the kind of learning curve that you can't be taught it. You have to sort of learn it through doing it.
And resilience. Going through the crap of people saying, oh, this is crap, this is whatever, and then like going through the other side.
Yeah, although I would say that never stops with comedy. You know, the thing about comedy, I'm sure you've observed this, you know, in your own work and in other people's, you cannot please everyone all the time. And that's true, I think, of all art. But comedy, weirdly, more than any other art form, if people don't like it, they really don't like it. Like, it makes them angry. There's a book by a guy called Jonathan Lynn, who wrote Yes, Prime Minister, and many other things. He's a brilliant comedy writer, and he wrote a brilliant comedy book called Comedy Rules. And he has a section on how if people don't like a drama on TV, they just switch it off and they don't let it consume any more of their lives than that. If people watch a comedy that they don't like, they get on Twitter and they talk about how much they hate it. You know, you think of something like Mrs. Brown's Boys, the amount of hate that attracts for the crime of trying to make people laugh. So yeah, I think as long as you're trying to make people laugh, you sort of have to accept that you're always really going to make some people angry for the crime of trying to make them laugh.
Yeah, it does sound a bit much. Yeah, it's. I mean, I don't necessarily like certain styles of comedy, and I think some of it's a bit, you know, when they talk about cancel culture and this and that. with what's going on with Joe Rogan with the mothership, and they're always purporting like them saying the N word and all of these sort of jokes and all of that. I mean, if you said that in a conversation with someone on the street, you would get punched with some of the things they
Mhm.
say on stage. So why should you say it on there? But I don't believe that someone should be destroyed for making a mistake of trying to be funny. I think they should just, they get the feedback when they don't get a laugh, and they
Mhm.
should just go and adjust it. I don't agree with comedians getting to their shell and saying, oh, you can't say anything anymore, this and that. No, just go in, adjust it, and make the joke better and find another way to deliver it. But I also don't believe on like trying to ruin someone's career for an ill-timed or misjudged joke at trying to make you laugh and make your day better. They made a mistake. You've made mistakes before. Don't try and pretend that you're perfect and you're better than this person. We've all done stupid things or horrible things.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
It's have you had that like do you get when you did your sitcoms, you must have had some emails from people that were funny and mad.
Well, well, people, I guess when you are writing for the BBC acts as a kind of protective shell around you because people hear something that they don't like on the BBC and they get in touch with the BBC, and the BBC sort of absorbs that, and unless there's something serious that needs to be passed on, you as the writer never have to hear about it. Um, I definitely had the experience when I was on Twitter, and thank God Twitter basically has died a death. I think we're much better off without it. But, people would occasionally tweet you to say, I just heard your sitcom on Radio 4, rubbish. And you think, well, all
What?
right, I can't, I'm really sorry that you didn't like it, but I don't know what you want me to do about it. And, but it is hard sometimes not to take that personally because, you've put something out into the world that you believed in, and the world has come back and said, hate this, don't like it, not funny. And of course, people also, that is outweighed by more people take the trouble to tell you they liked something than to tell you they didn't. But it is funny the impulse people had. I don't know, did people have that in real life, or did Twitter bring it out of us all? The feeling that you could just say whatever you wanted to a stranger. I think Twitter did it to us. It made people get in fights. You'd see people having fights with strangers, and you think, you wouldn't do this in real life. You would just,
Yes, yes, yes.
you'd leave it. um, I think it's almost impossible to understate the damage or do I mean understate or overstate? Either way, the damage that Twitter has sort of done to the world and to like public discourse and to all of our psyches. And hopefully the fact that it's dying a slow death will undo that. But I worry that it might be irreversible damage.
Maybe people can say what they want behind the laptop and they don't get punched for it. Some of the
Yeah,
things they say, I've heard people say to others, like to performers, saying, "Oh, you should die," or this and that. You wouldn't really generally. Some people would. They're that crazy, but most people wouldn't say those sort of things to people's face. So they
yeah,
feel brave and safe to say those things.
yeah, yeah. Well, as I say, I'm glad that because the other thing that you probably have experienced is that as soon as you do something kind of public facing, with Twitter, there's that search bar there as a sort of horrible flashing red temptation to Google, to search and see what people are saying about you. And that way madness lies. But, I've fallen into that trap more times than I would care to admit. And when you search, the title of your sitcom or your name, you are going to see what people are saying about you. And
Ah,
sometimes it's nice stuff and sometimes it's nasty stuff, but it's a horrible temptation, and I speak as someone who wrote a Radio 4 sitcom. I wouldn't want you to get the impression that hundreds upon thousands of people were tweeting about it. They weren't, but there were enough that I could get a sample of what the world was saying. And I really had to work with myself not to do that, because that's death to creativity. If you're writing
Oh,
with it in your head of how are people going to respond to this, that will stifle you. That's a way to kind of block yourself and start thinking. As I said, you can't please everyone all the time, but as soon as you're sort of thinking of, so-and-so who sent you a tweet saying, I hate your sitcom, you sort of internalize them, and then they're a voice in your head when you're writing. And that, as I say, that's death. You've got to shut that stuff out.
what would things be like if for example, your sitcoms got trillions of views and they're like millions and millions of subscribers, they'll follow it, but you didn't have the BBC to filter all the garbage? I mean, imagine how bad that would be.
Yeah, I know. And like for stand-ups, that must be what it's like, right? For big popular stand-ups who aren't protected by any kind of institution, who are just out there as themselves with no institution that comes sort of between the public and them. Yeah, it must be a nightmare. And I mean, again, I don't know what it must have been like at the sort of height of Twitter, being a stand-up on Twitter, but I'm glad I didn't have to go through it.
Yeah, it's but a lot of comics used to like Twitter in that it used to help them with jokes. In that if they got a good response for that, they would eventually put it in their set. Like Jimmy Carr used to do it. I know that Tom Little used to do it quite a lot. But yeah, it is. Well, I'm not on Twitter. I only use Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube and Facebook. So that's a good thing. And anyway, I look like Elon Musk without the glasses, so I don't know what would happen.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Instagram, I managed to cut my social media usage basically just down to Instagram. And it's a much friendlier space than Twitter ever was. Nothing, as far as I can see, seems to have filled the hole that Twitter was filling. The different platforms, people interact on a slightly different wavelength, I think. And there were those, like your Blue Sky and your Threads that were trying to basically replicate what Twitter was, but I don't think anything has managed to do that. And good, basically. I think, like I say, I think we're better off without it. But yeah, anyway.
It's a bit like the Cry Me a River song of Justin Timberlake. Some things are better left unsaid, but on Twitter, that doesn't happen.
No, nothing was left unsaid on Twitter. You're right. Everything that could be said was being said at all times by everyone.
It's so gross. Did you ever use it to like help with the writing though, like stand-ups do? Did you ever use it creatively?
Yeah, I guess maybe I did. In terms of, I mean, by and large, what it did was distract me, and Instagram definitely has filled that hole, which is when you should be writing, you could be scrolling. And that is a hole that's always there that you can fall into. But I guess it, because I was writing a sitcom that was about advertising and that was trying in some kind of way to tap into cultural conversations that were happening. Twitter was a way to witness those conversations and to kind of see what people were talking about. And, adverts are part of a cultural conversation, and you can see what people are saying about them on Twitter. And that fed a little bit into the show because the characters in the show were writing adverts that, there was one episode about an advert that got a huge backlash on Twitter. So I guess because I was writing a show in the world in which Twitter and social media in general was a big factor, in order to write that world authentically, I needed a sense of how it related to the real world. So I definitely couldn't say that it didn't have some use. And also, when you talk about comedians using it to build their profile, I definitely found out about opportunities through Twitter and made connections through Twitter that I probably would never have made otherwise. So I know I've really, really gone down the road of saying it was a terrible thing and I'm glad it's dead, but there were positives to it. And And I know it's not dead. I know X still exists and people do still use it. But I don't know about, well, you say you're not on it, but when my Twitter account is still open, and when I go on it, it's a bit like a ghost town. You know, most of my feed is just tweets from websites and kind of corporations who still have to have their X accounts running. But from the people that I used to follow, they're just all gone.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, it had its uses.
You've made me go. I'm going to go back on it probably this week. See what's happened.
Nothing will have happened. That's what will have happened. Elon Musk will have like tweeted some incredibly depressing video of an AI woman saying, "I will love you forever," and that will be it.
He is an interesting guy, Elon. Very
But
interesting.
that's a
guy.
whole other conversation.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Now, sitcom. I, growing up like yourself, used to love a few sitcoms. Like my dad used to play a lot of them on, and like I fell in love with Only Fools and Horses. I really liked Two Pints of Lager and a Packet of Crisps. I really loved Open All Hours.
Right.
Those. What was another one that I liked? I watched a little bit of Some Mothers Do Have Them, and people say that I do remind them of Frank Spencer at times. But yeah, I've. What was your, so when you started sitcom writing, like how did you develop your style, and what do you think with sitcoms back then wouldn't get published now? Because I know that with Only Fools and Horses, there's a lot of things that probably wouldn't be published now. I know that he made a joke about a guy on a bike who was a doctor about his turban, and they immediately got rid of that, but it worked in that time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess you can sort of go mad, I think, looking back at cultural artifacts from the past, especially sitcoms, which are kind of having to be near the line in order to get laughs. If you sort of look back on them now and apply, modern standards, they so many of them fall apart under scrutiny because the line has moved, and so things that were near the line are now like way over the line, as they should be. But I think, and I hope with those sitcoms, that do have, like you say, those kind of jokes that you wouldn't make now, that the actual kind of comedy bones of the sitcom, like the comedy bones of Only Fools and Horses, it doesn't rely on the jokes that you wouldn't make now. It's still a brilliantly constructed sitcom with brilliant characters and a setting, and it all still works. There are just some jokes where you're like, oh, I wouldn't go there now. And there are definitely some sitcoms that don't have that solid foundation, or whether it's so baked into the foundation is, jokes that you wouldn't make now, that you sort of think, let's put that whole thing in the bin. We don't need to revisit that. But, something like Only Fools and Horses, I feel like it stands up in spite of maybe things that we might now feel are a bit misjudged. But it's interesting you say your dad. So your dad was putting you on to things like Only Fools and Horses, is that right?
Well, when I was growing up, he used to always play a lot of programs on the TV, and like one of the programs that used to always come up was Only Fools and Horses, Open All Hours, The Two Ronnies. I never got that sketch about the four candles. I don't know why, but it just never really worked for me. And then, yeah, and Two Pints of Lager was something that I started to watch. And I've arranged an interview with Susan Nixon, so I'm really, hopefully it's all set,
Oh,
and
brilliant.
I'm really excited to talk to her. But
Yeah, that's fantastic.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because I think a lot about the sitcoms. So many of the sitcoms that I was watching when I was young were not sitcoms that were being made in the here and now, and like in the present day. They were things from like 20, 30 years earlier, that my parents loved and were getting on VHS. So I never watched Only Fools and Horses when I was young. I only came to it later because it just wasn't something that was on in the house.
Okay.
Whereas the things that were on in our house, those Fawlty Towers was my dad's absolute favorite.
Oh yes, yes. That is one.
My mum loved Morecambe and Wise, so I used to see a lot of Morecambe and Wise at Christmas. And funnily enough, there was no crossover. My mum hated Fawlty Towers and my dad hated Morecambe and Wise. But they came together on Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. That was a family watch, and Dad's Army as well. So yeah, your comedy sensibility, I think, is shaped a bit by your parents and what they find funny and what they introduce to you as comedy. And there were obviously things that then I discovered myself. You know, my parents, neither of them thought Blackadder was funny, and I thought it was the funniest thing in the world. Again, I was still watching it, sort of thinking of it as, yeah, this is a sitcom that's being made now, not realizing that it was like 10, 15 years old already at the time I was watching it. But yeah, Blackadder, Simpsons was obviously something that was for me and not for them. Not the 9 o'clock news as well. And I wonder, it's funny to think of myself age 10 watching Not the 9 o'clock news, which now watching it is full of parodies of things from the 1970s or sketches about 1970s politics. I think, what was I getting out of this age 10? I wouldn't have understood any of these references, but I loved it anyway. I guess just because they're all such good comedy performers, and the comedy overcomes, even if you don't know the cultural references, it's like strong enough, there's enough silliness and, you know, enough if Rowett Atkinson doing a silly voice that it's funny even without those cultural touchstones.
You mentioned something that was interesting in the sitcom writing workshop that I did. And like the guy, Simon, I still need to get his surname, but I can't believe I got it wrong. But he mentioned the key thing in like Modern Family, in that I only watched a bit where Sophie Vergara said she's taking a shower, and then he said, what's it called? If I don't agree with that, shoot me. And then it just came across on TikTok and I saw it. That's all I know about Modern Family. And I know that she's a feisty Spanish woman, Latina woman that gets hit on a lot. And he's a very chill, like, dad. And what's funny about it is the contrast between the characters. And then you got the gay couple that are very opposites. And he talks about how it's the characters' contrast that makes it very good. And I think what you're saying there about with Blackadder, even though you didn't get the cultural references, it's because they're such well-written, strong characters with great contrasts. That's what made it so funny.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so much of sitcom writing is about putting characters together who will clash. You know, once you start kind of picking apart sitcoms, you just sort of see the same pattern emerge everywhere. You know, it's talking about Dad's Army. All right, well, you've got this incredibly uptight, pompous Captain Mannering, who's going to be a second in command, the most laid-back, chill man in the world. And immediately those two people are going to clash. You know, you've like Red Dwarf. Lister is the biggest, like, slob and doesn't care about the rules. Who's his bunkmate? This incredibly fastidious, uptight guy. Immediately they're in conflict. I think that my favourite example, and I'm now talking with my kind of sitcom teaching hat on, which is why I'm getting analytical, is in Frasier, that you're like, okay, but you've got Frasier, and he's this pompous, you know, upper class kind of pretentious guy. So his roommate is his dad, who is blue collar, laid back, sits in his armchair drinking beer while Frasier's, you know, on the balcony drinking wine. So that's a great contrast. But then who do they make Frasier's brother? They make him even more Frasier than Frasier.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's like they do the obvious thing and then they do the unobvious thing, which is say, all right, Frasier is Frasier at 10. Let's make his brother Frasier at 15, who's even more pompous and even more pretentious, and who makes Frasier seem laid back and blue collar by comparison. But yeah, all sitcoms, I think, are built on those same structures of I've got one character who is going to be in conflict with them, whether it's because they're the opposite or whether it's because they're even more like them. And that's true, you know, of traditional kind of classic sitcoms like we're talking about, but also I think even of, you know, of modern or sort of more kind of, more modern sitcoms, things like Fleabag, which maybe doesn't immediately look like a traditional sitcom. You know, Fleabag is a hot mess. What's Fleabag's sister? She's incredibly ordered. You know, she's not messy at all. Her life is in like, she's a freak about keeping her life sort of in order and keeping control over it, while Fleabag is out of control. And so immediately those two sisters are going to be in conflict.
Yeah. What so I'm going to talk about two instances that I find funny in sitcoms that I love. So Only Fools and Horses, some of my favorite things like Rodney and like Doughboy. Rodney is always the sensible, miserable one, and he's the straight man that just puts at daft things. And his face, as my dad would say, would tell 1,000 stories. And then you got and this Doughboy just trying random mad stuff, and then you got Trigger, who's my favorite character in the whole program. And it's so funny that he thinks he's just being regular, but he never realizes how stupid the things he's saying. Like my favorite line of his that I always remember, and maybe this would probably get cancelled now, but he's sat in a van with Denzel and they're waiting for, I think it was in the Christmas specials, for Doughboy and Rodney. And he says, I don't want to end up a lonely bachelor like my cousin Ronnie. And then he says, oh, he always has a funny taste in women. And then Denzel says, in what way? Well, they were men. Now that's it's a well-written, clever line, but for sure that would get cancelled or something now. But it's so funny. It encapsulates, and Denzel's face was hilarious. The stupidity of like Trigger delivering that line with a straight face, not realizing how stupid what he said was.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like what we were saying, you know, the comedy bones and the structure of that joke are brilliant and they work. You know, even if you're saying maybe you wouldn't make that joke now, the structure of it and the form, you know, is not relying on, you know, so the punchline is they were men, but, you know, the way they're playing it and the way that the reveal is structured, you know, all that is just really great comedy writing. And you're making me think I've got to go and rewatch Only Fools and Horses. Because like I said, I mean, I've seen it and I know it, but it's not like in my bones the way some of those other ones are, because I only came to it later. It wasn't something that we all sat around and watched the Christmas specials of. Because yeah, for whatever reason, it just hadn't clicked with my parents, so it just wasn't part of the like conversation in the house. But yeah, I should go back and watch it like properly in order, see how it develops. Have you seen it start to finish?
I've seen more or less all the episodes, and someone did say something that was quite markedly good about it, in that the best episodes, I think, are the Christmas episodes, and I think I'd agree with that, actually. When I look back on it all, it is the Christmas specials. Well, one thing I would like to ask you, what are like sitcoms that a lot of people know of, where you can talk about hilarious comedy, well-known sitcom scenes that are well-renowned, like The Four Candles or anything like that? What is it that people find hilarious that don't know what's happening, but like now that you as a writer, you can appreciate them even more because you look at the genius of the writing and how it works?
That's a good question. I guess if you think of Fawlty Towers, basically is the sitcom that everybody knows, right? That kind of just transcends all kind of barriers. It's so like it towers over kind of British comedy. I don't know. Did you see the stage show version of it that was on in the West End?
I want to, but I remember seeing a lot of the scenes with like Manuel doing mad things, getting like all panicky, and then Basil like going all over the place and just, yeah. The thing that's so funny is that they'll panic and do such ridiculous things out of common hotel problems.
Well, and it's funny watching it on stage because I feel a bit that those actors are kind of trapped in a no-win situation, because either they do an impression of John Cleese and Connie Booth and Prunella Scales and Andrew Sachs, and if they do an impression, inevitably it won't be as good as the real thing because an impression never is. Or they do completely their own thing. You know, they take the characters and make them their own. But then people are going to come and go, well, that's not Basil. That's not what Basil does. That's not what Sybil does. But if they try and do an impression, then people are going to come and go, no, it wasn't as good as John Cleese. So it's a difficult trap for an actor, you know, and I'm sure it's a wonderful job. And I'm, you know, I'm highly envious still. There's still the little performer part of me that thinks I'd love that job. But it is a challenge. And it is, I guess, with any of those stage shows that revive really beloved sitcoms, that is a challenge you have to navigate. But so with Fawlty Towers as an example, obviously that's a sitcom set in a hotel. And that's its kind of USP. It's a sitcom in a hotel. And I think lots of people start when they're writing a sitcom, they're like, well, what if I wrote a sitcom set in a place? And often it's the place where they work. People often will be like, I work in this place. No one's ever done a sitcom about this. All these funny things happen. So I'm going to write a sitcom set there. And with my own sitcom, I was like, well, what about a sitcom set in an advertising agency? That would be funny. And I think what's interesting about Fawlty Towers and any sitcom is that no setting is funny. You know, setting can be a setting for comedy or it can be a setting for drama. No place is funny in and of itself. Fawlty Towers is funny because it's in a hotel run by a man who hates his guests. That's what makes it funny. And so everything springs out of the fact that Basil is this angry man who is angry at the sort of stupidity and, you know, the whims and the demands of other people. And inexplicably, he has chosen a job where he has to be in contact with other people the entire time. Why is Basil running a hotel? It doesn't make any sense. But that's where the comedy comes from. And all of the episodes are sort of built on the idea of what's the worst thing that could happen to Basil? What guest would he find hardest to cope with? You know, so Basil is a guy who struggles with even meeting basic customer service demands. So what happens in Waldorf salad? They bring in an American guest who expects a much higher level of customer service, you know, than is appropriate for a Torquay hotel. So he's expecting that the kitchens will stay open and then they'll make him a Waldorf salad because he's an American traveler and he's expecting American levels of customer service, which Basil obviously isn't prepared to provide. So it's like the worst person for Basil to have to deal with. You know, and in the episode where the Germans come to stay, the joke isn't that some wacky Germans have come to make Basil's life hell. Some normal Germans have come, but those Germans have activated all Basil's neuroses about the war. You know, it's always about who are the guests. It's not that the guests are funny. It's that the guests activate something in Basil. You know, the sexually uninhibited guests activate all Basil's sort of neuroses around sex. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying that Fawlty Towers is something that I would have been like, yeah, it's a funny sitcom about a hotel where lots of different people come every episode and that's where the humor is. But it's all in Basil. It's not in the hotel and it's not in the guests. It's in Basil and his reactions. And I guess when I'm approaching a sitcom now, and whether that's my own or advising other people on the things they're writing, is always, if you've got a new and original setting, that's brilliant. But immediately after that, you've got to say, all right, well, who is the person that doesn't belong there? Who's the person that that setting is going to bring the humor out of? You know, like Dad's Army is another good example. Like the Home Guard isn't a funny setting unless the captain of the Home Guard thinks he's fighting on the front lines. That's funny. Yeah.
And going back to your point on like Fawlty Towers, like what is it about the contrast with Basil and the people he works with that makes those things extra funny?
Yeah, well, I guess Basil is, what do we say that Basil is? He's angry. He's like highly strung. Small things turn into huge problems for him. So what's his wife? She is hyper confident, hyper competent, and hyper customer focused. So a guest who drives Basil mad, Sybil is able to deal with in a calm and rational way. So immediately, they're in conflict. And I always think about someone when I was first starting writing comedy was like, the thing about a sitcom is you've got to have an idiot. All sitcoms have to have an idiot to generate humor. And another piece of advice that they gave is, but you've got to set your idiot at a level of reality that is in tune with your sitcom. So if your sitcom is set in the real world, your idiot can't be too stupid to function in the real world. Does that make sense? So in Blackadder, Baldrick is too stupid to really exist in the world as we know it. It doesn't matter because Blackadder isn't set in the world as we know it. It's set in like a heightened cartoon world. And it's really difficult when you're writing a sitcom, if you are setting it in the real world, to have an idiot who is funny, but not so stupid that they can't function in the world as we know it. And the way Fawlty Towers gets around that is Manuel is the idiot. He's not an idiot. He just doesn't speak English. All of the problems arise from the fact that he doesn't speak English and Basil is not patient with him because Basil isn't patient with anyone. And Basil claims to know Spanish, but doesn't actually know Spanish. So you get all the jokes from Manuel that you get from an idiot, but he's not stupid. He's a perfectly intelligent man. He's just unfortunately working in a hotel where his inability to speak English, first of all, would be a problem anywhere because all the guests are English. But the person who claims to be able to speak Spanish and should be helping him is not, is actually making his life much harder.
Yes. Yeah, that's the it's brilliant that. And it's a shame that it only went on for 2 seasons, am I right?
Yeah, there are only 12 episodes, but in a way, I think I may be quoting someone here. In fact, I am. I'm quoting David Mitchell, who in Peep Show, Peep Show ran for 10 seasons. And I think in an interview, he was sort of being asked about, worrying about repeating themselves. And he was saying, well, something like Peep Show, where the characters are sort of just getting into sort of sitcom adventures, that can just run indefinitely. But Fawlty Towers, because they're farces, basically, all 12 episodes, rather than like traditional sitcoms necessarily. They are like sort of perfectly ordered French farces. And it's perfectly reasonable for John Cleese and Connie Booth to have done 12 of those and be like, you know what? There are no more of these. Like, this formula cannot sustain forever. Like, we've done 12 of these and that's as many as we've got in our heads and as many as the sort of form can sustain. So even though if you are to offer me now like a DVD from a parallel universe where there were 10 seasons of Fawlty Towers, I'd bite your arm off and it would be the most exciting thing in the world. I wonder if it could sustain that level of quality that it did for 12 episodes over 50 or 100. Yeah, maybe it could, but I suspect it probably ran as long as it needed to.
Yeah, sometimes what's it called? Leave people wanting more. Hollywood
Yeah.
with Star Wars, bloody Indiana Jones, and all of these.
Yeah, that's the thing. You think you want more, and then you get more, and you're a bit like, it's not as good. I was happier when I only had a little bit, and I wanted more. You're right. Star Wars is the ultimate example. We've got so much of it now. It's like it's not special anymore because it's everywhere. There's a million different Star Wars shows. When it was just these 3 movies, that was exciting. And okay, there was a huge universe outside of those movies that you felt could be explored, but you could sort of do that in your own head. Whereas now it's being explored in all these TV series and they're by and large less exciting probably than what you had in your head.
Yeah. Now, I know you got to get going soon, but I've got 3 things that I want to ask of you.
Yeah.
What was your interpretation of sitcom writing before you got into it, and how did they change? What have you learned from all of your years of doing sitcom writing that you apply to teaching new students?
Yeah, I guess lots of things. And I think a lot about the lessons that you can teach versus the lessons that you have to learn. Because there are lots of things that I feel like if only I could go back and tell myself, age 23 or whatever, however old I was when I started writing, things that I know now that I could tell myself and sort of save myself the pain of having to learn them. But it doesn't work like that, really. You know, a lot of lessons about comedy writing or writing in general, or just creativity in general, you can only learn them by like living them. You know what I mean? There are things that I think I would tell myself that my young self would be like, yeah, all right, granddad, and just wouldn't listen, wouldn't take it on board. You have to kind of, I don't know, physically learn them, but you have to learn them on a personal level rather than just have someone tell you. You know, which is not to say that I don't think you can teach lots of useful things about teaching a sitcom. I mean, the thing that strikes me the most when I'm reading students' work, you know, reading a sitcom by someone who's writing their first one, is it's so often you read scripts that are confusing, that are thinking the most important thing here is that I've got to be funny, which of course is important when you're writing a comedy script. But if it's not clear what's happening, then your script will never be funny. Because if someone is reading it and they're confused, no one's ever laughing when they're confused, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay.
That if you're reading a script and you're thinking, what's happening here? What is this person meaning or thinking, or who is this? You can never be laughing. So I always try and impress upon people, and I, you know, include myself in this. You know, when I'm teaching sitcoms, I always feel like I'm teaching myself as much as I'm teaching the other people in the room. The most important thing is your sitcom clear? You know, is your script clear? Is it laying out quickly and clearly who these characters are, what the setting is, like what their personalities are? Because it's only then that they're going to be able to be funny. And drama, I think, drama writing can live in ambiguity. You can read a drama script and you can think, who is this person? You know, what do they mean by this? Or what are they thinking? You know, I think of something like Mad Men. You know, the whole journey of that is sort of getting to understand Don Draper. And if you look at the first episode of that, the twist at the end sort of reveals him to be a completely different person to who we thought he was as we were watching the episode. I don't think generally that works in comedy. I think you've got to understand who characters are in order for them to make you laugh. And it just always surprises me how often scripts fail that test, where I think, you know, I might read a script 2 or 3 times, and by the 3rd time I've read it, I think, I've got a handle on this now. But if you're writing a script that's going to go out, you know, let's say it's going to agents, producers, production companies, you are asking a lot of them if it only reveals itself fully after 2 or 3 reads, because probably they don't have time to read your script 3 times. If you're entering a competition, you know, you'll be lucky if they read the whole script. They might read the first 10 pages and does it grab them? So you will make your life and their lives so much easier if you've written a script that straight away, like the setting, the stakes, the characters are clear. And one of the things that I always do when I'm teaching sitcom writing is to look at a few scripts of really good sitcoms of the first episode and see, usually within the first page, you're like, I know who this person is. I know what the tone of this comedy is. I know where it's set. Like, I think I spoke about Fleabag earlier. By the end of the first page of that, you know that this is a sitcom about Fleabag and you know who Fleabag is. Like it is so clearly laid out within the first page. And because you're like, okay, I'm clear what's going on and who this is, you're then able to make those jokes and have them land in a way that if by the end of the first page you're like, so who is this about and what's going on and where are we set? The Detectorists is another really good one. You know, within the first page you're like, okay, this is a sitcom about these 2 blokes and I know who they are. Like, I know they're contrasting personalities. I know that they're metal detectorists. So I always feel like the first test you want to subject your script to, if you've written a script, people are always tempted, I think. And again, I've fallen into this trap many, many times. You write a script and you want to show it to someone and you want them to tell you if it's funny or not, which is a difficult position to put anyone in, to ask them to tell you if your thing is funny. But a more useful question, I think, is, did you understand what was going on? Did you get it? Because if you don't pass that test, you're not going to be funny. Even if you've written funny jokes, if people don't understand characters, the setup, then they're probably not going to laugh. So yeah, that's the biggest thing that I think, the most important lesson when you're writing a comedy script that I feel like I've learned myself. Because again, I've failed that test lots of times. I've written scripts where people wouldn't understand what's going on, where it's not clear. And that is something that now I try to apply to my own writing. How quickly can I clue you in? Who is this? What's going on? What's the world? What's the setup? And then you can start worrying about being funny.
And this is a question that's a bit left field on what you just said, but how do you say that statement fits in with a lot of great stand-ups that you see on stage?
Oh, that's a good question. And it doesn't, it's not an easy one for me to answer because I watch less stand-up than, or not. I guess what I do is I watch a lot of stand-ups who I know already.
Okay.
If a new John Mulaney stand-up drops, I would watch that because I know I like John Mulaney and I know what his persona is. So he doesn't need to do that work for me and for anyone really, because he's so famous. Like I love Mark Watson.
The Welsh comedian.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's amazing with improv, and
Yeah,
I saw him.
love
Yeah,
him.
he's great.
He's brilliant. But again, I've been watching him do stand-up for years. I saw him when I was at university. He was doing a gig at the university the first time I saw him. And so I know what I'm getting from him and I know what his persona is. So I'm coming to these stand-ups because I know what they're giving me and I know it's what I want. And I don't that often go to sort of comedy nights where I'm watching 5 stand-ups for the first time. I used to when I was doing sketch comedy in London. We used to be on the same bill as stand-ups. But I would guess, and I'd be interested to know what you think about this, I would guess it's a similar sort of thing, that as a stand-up, your first joke, the first thing you say, you want to be clearly setting out your persona, right? And your comedy style. You don't want to like open with one kind of joke and then the rest of your set is a completely different kind. If you're going to be really surreal, maybe you wouldn't open with like an observational, sort of very mundane Jerry Seinfeld style. What's the deal with like airline food? And then go off on some sort of mad surreal. Maybe you would. I don't know. As I say, I'm not a stand-up expert, but I would guess that clearly laying out your like, this is who I am, is important. Is that fair?
I think a lot of the great stand-ups do that. Like Milton Jones with his weird surreal persona gives that away. Mickey Flanagan does that a lot with his "what there son" sort of look. But I'd say there are a lot of stand-ups who write good jokes and they're funny, but there's most stand-ups I don't see that with. But a lot of the great stand-ups and a lot of fantastic stand-ups do exactly as you say.
Right.
Because people know what they're getting. There's a product there. There's a reason for why they should go and watch you more than anyone else. If you're generic, then they've seen you a million times before. They're not going to get unique experience. I know I interviewed Frank Sinatra on this podcast. He plays Frank Sinatra combined with, but he gets a bit of a divided response. But he says he wants that. He wants, you got to affect people because then they come and watch you. And he says he's built a bit of a fan base. And he says, yeah, and even with Jerry Sadowitz being really offensive and being as he isn't for everyone, but people know what they're getting. And it's a very unique product, which is why people go and watch him. Yes, you may not get into certain clubs, but you have a product that you can sell. If you're just like with every other stand-up, who just writes good jokes, but there's no, like you said, about persona or certain things, and they work because of certain things. There's no product to sell. There's no reason to answer why someone should go and watch your show because they've seen you a million times before. It's the same with a TV show. Why should they watch you over other things? There's no, there's going to be people that, as you say, hate it, but those that like it will really like it, and you have a fan base.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes back to what we were saying before. It's about finding that confidence to be entirely who you are and have the confidence and the acceptance that some people will reject you for who you are. Some people won't like that. It won't be for everyone. And I think going back to what I was saying about the lessons that you can only learn, you can't be taught. I think you've got to learn that, because I think everyone, when they're starting out in comedy, not everyone, most people,
Yeah.
don't have that confidence. They are sort of trying to find their voice, and they're sort of thinking, well, I want to please as many people as possible. So a lot of stand-ups that I know, I guess, who I started with at university, started with quite a generic voice and then developed into their own incredibly idiosyncratic, personal one. But it's frightening to do that, because what you're doing, whether it's in sitcom writing, whether it's in stand-up or any kind of art, you're basically saying, well, here I am. This is me. What do you think? And the world is going to think different things. Some people are going to think, we love you, you're brilliant, your worldview reflects our own, and that's exciting. And other people are going to think, I hate that. That's not my worldview, and I don't respond to that. And that's okay. That's what comedy is supposed to do. It's supposed to be for some people and not for others. But it does take time, I think, to learn that and have that confidence and that acceptance of that. But, that's where the best comedy comes from people who are pursuing their own vision and letting themselves speak with their own personal voice.
Yeah. Who are people that you've come across in the sitcom writing world, or like performers that you say exemplify that, demonstrate that?
Do you mean that I've come across personally, or that people whose work that I respect, or both?
Both.
There's a writer who he's a friend of mine. I've also worked with him, and I guess I worked with him first and he became a friend. A guy called Mark Evans,
Okay.
who wrote a radio show called Bleak Expectations. If you've ever heard of that then transferred to TV and then was in the West End a couple of years ago. He writes the kind of comedy that I could never write. Like, he writes this incredibly surreal, silly, like pure gag-based comedy. And he's so brilliant at it, but he's so like clear-eyed about that's the style that he loves. And yeah, it's such a pleasure to work with him, because he's such a, he's a kind of comedy guru in that he can do all kinds of different styles. But Bleak Expectations is, if you listen to that, it's completely his own voice. It's completely his own style. And, of course, like all of us, there are influences that you can see in it. It's, it's built on the things that he loves, but he's created completely his own thing. And it's incredibly silly. And some people don't like silly comedy, Some people like comedy that's much more rooted in the real world, and, might look at that and go, oh, it's too silly. It's too silly to be funny. Whereas, other people, that's what they want from their comedy. So yeah, he's definitely someone who I think has a very clear voice of his own. And, he's a few years older than me, so I don't know at what point, whether that came ready-made or whether that was something that he found as he went on.
Okay.
I'm sure there are people who literally come into the world with their comedy voice fully formed and have, are good to go. But I think they're outweighed by the people who have to work to find it and, have to get it wrong and have to, start doing the generic stuff and then move on to the personal stuff.
Okay. Now, from who's listening in right now, what is one bit of advice you give to every performer out there that's unique to your comedy journey? And how do they find out about you?
Uh, to every performer,
Or anyone in comedy or creative field, I should say.
well, I think it probably comes back to what we're talking about, that find your own voice and have the courage to pursue that, and have the confidence that if you find your voice and you put it out into the world, you will find your people, you'll find your tribe. And it won't be everyone, but have the confidence to put it out there and put it out on as many platforms as you can. And don't get discouraged. This is something that I definitely say to people who want to write a sitcom. It's so easy to write a sitcom script and send it to BBC Writers' Room or an agent, and they reject it and feel like, oh, well, I have learned that it's not good. I thought it was good, and I sent it to someone who knows, and they told me it's not good. So I now lose confidence in it, or lose confidence in myself. But all that ever means is, well, that wasn't your person. That agent wasn't the right person to represent you, or, that production company wasn't the right company to make your script. Because, again, as we keep saying, comedy is not for everyone. And the chances of you immediately finding the person who reads your script and goes, yeah, this is really funny, it's exactly what I'm looking for, you might find them first time, but you probably won't. And don't let that discourage you. There's that very, very famous Fawlty Towers rejection letter from someone who is now lives in infamy at the BBC, who, I don't know if they'd watched the pilot or read the pilot script. I think maybe it was the script, and their feedback was, this is just utterly unfunny. No one's going to like this. I'm afraid it's a disaster. And what was the most popular British sitcom of all time. And someone didn't see that. So, you might write the best sitcom in the world. Not everyone is going to see it on the page for what it is. And I think that applies probably to people who are doing stand-up and people who are making, sketches online. If you believe in what you're doing, have faith in it and keep pushing it. Because you will find the people who it speaks to the way, you intended to.
Okay. And for anyone that wants to find out about you and your work or do one of your courses, what's the best way for them to get in contact?
Well, so I teach at the Comedy School in Camden. I do a sitcom workshop there roughly once every 6 months. I did one this Sunday just gone, so the next one will probably be May of next year. And that's just a 1-day, 10 till 6, roughly, intensive sitcom kind of masterclass kind of a thing. Everything we try and cover in that day, all the fundamentals of writing sitcoms, and that sort of basic theory. And then we look at scripts and how things are put into practice. And through the Comedy School as well, I do, if people have scripts that they are looking for feedback on, I do sort of mentoring through the Comedy School as well. And in terms of my own work, Reluctant Persuaders is on BBC Sounds, or at least one of the series is, but you can also get it on Audible and on Spotify. So yeah, it's out there if you would like to find it. And yeah, as I was saying before, the first series, how people always say about sitcoms, oh, you've got to get through the first series and then it gets good. I feel I shouldn't be saying that about my own sitcom. Oh. That is a little bit how I feel. Not that the first series is terrible, but it's not necessarily representative of the later series. But it's not it's not for me to say which parts of it are good and which aren't. But yeah, anyway, that's where you can find it. And yeah, that's where I do most of my teaching. I do little bits and pieces here and there, but the Comedy School would be the main place to look.
Okay. Well, guys, I hope you've enjoyed the episode. If you enjoyed it, give it a 5-star review on Amazon or iTunes or Spotify. Follow Ed, do his course, follow the podcast. If you didn't, just keep it to yourself or give it to your enemies.
Don't tweet us about it. We don't want to know.
Yes. Don't. Keep it quiet. But yeah, you know where to go. We've got a few episodes coming up. We've got an Aboriginal comedian coming on, which we're really excited about. Yeah. I'll take care, guys, and I'll see you at the next episode.